The Galactic Empire had ruled the known stars for millennia, its grip tightening over countless worlds. Species that dared resist were crushed, their civilizations reduced to footnotes in Imperial history. Conquest was inevitable, resistance futile. So when a fledgling race from the Orion Arm petitioned for diplomatic recognition, the Empire barely took notice. Humans were young, primitive by galactic standards. They spoke of peace, of cooperation. The Empire heard only weakness. Fleet Marshal Vacan stood in the grand chamber of the Imperial War Council, overlooking the holographic display of the Sol system, a single habitable planet, a few scattered colonies and rudimentary fleets. Hardly worth a full-scale campaign. They called themselves the United Earth Coalition, droned Strategos Kellen, his elongated, violet-hued fingers dancing across the control panel. A fractured species recently unified under one government. Militarily inexperienced, technologically inferior. Their fleets rely on outdated projectile weaponry and chemical-based propulsion. A ripple of amusement spread through the assembled officers. The Empire's warships move faster than light, their plasma lances capable of reducing entire cityscapes to glass. What could these humans possibly offer but their surrender? Vacan, a veteran of dozens of planetary subjugations, scoffed. And yet, they request diplomacy? Kellen nodded. Their delegation awaits in the Prime Hall. Vacan sighed. These were the worst kinds of conflicts, ones that required ceremony before the inevitable bloodshed. The humans arrived in a silver diplomatic vessel, dwarfed by the Empire's titanic dreadnoughts. Their delegation consisted of a handful of individuals clad in stiff uniforms, their expressions unreadable. At their head stood General Robert Callahan, a man built like war itself. He lacked the refined elegance of an imperial statesman. His jaw was hard-set, his eyes cold and calculating. Imperial Archminister Valtros greeted them with the usual pleasantries, speaking in the measured, patronizing tone reserved for species on the brink of subjugation. Callahan, however, did not smile. He did not bow. He merely extended a hand. Valtros hesitated before shaking it. The human's grip was iron. "We appreciate the audience," Callahan said. His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen battle, who had ordered men to die and watched them obey. "We come in the spirit of peace, but let me be clear. Humanity does not kneel." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Arrogance, some whispered. Ignorance, others thought. Valtros merely raised an eyebrow. "No one is asking you to kneel, General. We seek only to integrate your people into the fold of civilization." Callahan smirked. "That's a fancy way of saying surrender." Silence. Vacan stepped forward, towering over the human. "You misunderstand the situation. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives." Callahan's expression didn't change. "Then you've made a mistake." Vacan's fingers curled into a fist. "Watch your tone, human. I'd advise you to do the same." The chamber tensed, but Callahan did not flinch. After a moment, Valtros chuckled, diffusing the moment with a wave of his hand. "There is no need for hostility. We simply wish to guide your species toward prosperity. And if we decline," Valtros sighed, "then the Empire will ensure your compliance." Callahan said nothing at first. His gaze drifted across the gathered officials, memorizing faces. Then he nodded. "Then I have nothing more to say." He turned on his heel and left, his delegation following without another word. Vacan watched him go. "Shall I order their vessel disabled?" Valtros shook his head. "No need. Let them return to their world, with their pride intact." He turned back to the war table, eyes narrowing. "We will make an example of them soon enough." Months later, when the Empire launched its first strike against the outermost human colony, they did so with the confidence of a predator toying with prey. The attack was swift, brutal, and utterly one-sided. Orbital bombardments reduced cities to rubble in mere hours. Ground forces met only scattered resistance before securing control of the planet. The surviving population was rounded up, their leaders executed. A transmission was sent to Earth, a simple message of dominance. What the Empire failed to anticipate was humanity's response. Within days, American warships arrived in system, moving with a precision that belied their supposed inferiority. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet head-on, they struck supply lines, sabotaged fuel depots, and cut off communication relays. The Empire, accustomed to open battlefield engagements, found itself mired in a war of shadows. The humans did not fight conventionally. They adapted, they improvised, and they killed without hesitation. It was Vakin himself who received the first report that chilled his blood. A forward operating base had gone silent. When reconnaissance teams arrived, they found only death. Every Imperial soldier stationed there had been executed, shot cleanly between the eyes. Their bodies were stacked in neat rows, their weapons placed beside them. A single message was burned into the steel walls of the command center. You wanted war. Now you have it. Vakin stared at the words for a long time. He had seen defiance before, but never like this. Not with such precision, such cold, calculating intent. The humans had not just retaliated. They had sent a message. For the first time in his long career, Fleet Marshal Vakin felt something unusual. Doubt. And deep beneath that, fear. The American fleet arrived in silence, slipping into the contested system like wraiths in the dark. There was no grand announcement, no blaring of war horns, only the cold efficiency of men and machines honed by centuries of war. The Empire had struck first, confident in their supremacy. Now, humanity answered. General Robert Callahan stood on the bridge of the USS Vengeance, watching as the battle unfolded. Holographic displays painted a brutal picture. Imperial garrison stationed across the occupied colony. Enemy patrols sweeping the system in lazy, predictable formations. They had not expected resistance so soon. They had not expected humanity to fight back at all. That was their first mistake. Targets locked, came the calm voice of Captain Andrea Hayes. Her hands hovered over the control panel, awaiting the command. Around her, the bridge crew worked with mechanical precision. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. They had seen the reports, the massacres, the Imperial broadcast displaying human bodies lined up in the dirt. The soldiers of the Empire thought themselves untouchable. Callahan's jaw tightened. Commence Operation Shock and awe. A split second later, the void of space came alive. Railguns fired, their hypervelocity rounds tearing through the darkness, slamming into Imperial cruisers before their shields could fully engage. Missiles streaked from hidden launchers, punching through armor plating with pinpoint accuracy. The Empire's formations buckled as the first wave of destruction swept through them, their command channels erupting into panic shouts. The Vengeance led the charge, flanked by a dozen American warships. Unlike the Empire's towering dreadnoughts, bristling with ornate weaponry, these vessels were built for one purpose: war. No ceremony, no grandeur, just unrelenting, merciless efficiency. The Empire had conquered with overwhelming firepower. America fought with precision. Within minutes, the first Imperial outpost fell. Special Forces teams deployed from dropships, their insertion swift and surgical. In the capital city of the occupied colony, Imperial officers barely had time to react before the first explosions tore through their command center. Elite operatives, clad in adaptive camouflage, moved through the streets like ghosts, cutting down patrols, planting charges, and severing enemy communications. Vakin received the first distress calls while aboard his command ship, the Inviolable Dominion. He listened in silence as his officers relayed panic reports. Human forces had struck multiple locations simultaneously, their assault relentless and coordinated. Enemy intelligence was patchy. Imperial sensors had been blinded by electromagnetic pulses, and their soldiers were being picked off before they could form a proper counterattack. They fight dishonorably, one officer spat. They strike from the shadows like cowards. Vakin's gaze hardened. It was not cowardice. It was something far worse. Adaptation. He turned toward the fleet display. The humans had carved a hole in the Imperial perimeter, but they had yet to engage his main battle group. This was not a full-scale invasion. This was something more insidious. A message arrived, intercepted from a human transmission. Vacan read it slowly. They wanted a war. We'll give them one. The word sent a cold spike through him. He had studied human history, if only briefly. Their wars were filled with blood and fire, fought not for conquest, but for obliteration. They did not wage battle to subjugate. They fought to end. The next 24 hours confirmed his worst fears. Imperial outposts burned. Supply lines were severed. Entire garrisons disappeared overnight, their bodies never found. In one sector, an entire fleet yard was reduced to nothing but twisted wreckage, sabotage rendering its construction capabilities useless. The worst was yet to come. On the captured colony, Imperial soldiers awoke to a city transformed. The human resistance had gone from scattered insurgents to a coordinated nightmare. Streets that had once been easily patrolled now became kill zones. Snipers fired from rooftops, their bullets punching through Imperial armor like paper. Explosive traps turned alleyways into death traps. But it wasn't just the tactics. It was the psychological warfare. In one garrison, soldiers found their commander's body hanging upside down from a street lamp, a knife driven into his throat. Carved into the metal below him was a single phrase, written in perfect Imperial script. No mercy. In another sector, an entire platoon vanished. When reinforcements arrived, all they found were their helmets, stacked neatly in a pyramid. A recording played over the base's speakers. American music, something old and eerie, a slow, deliberate tune filled with static. It was not just war. It was terror. And the Empire, for all its strength, had never been on the receiving end. Vacan stood in the command center, watching the casualty reports come in. He clenched his fists. This was not how the war was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to break, to submit, to fall to their knees and beg for mercy. Instead, they were teaching the Empire what war truly was. He turned to his officers, his voice like steel. End this. Now, but deep down he knew the truth. It had only just begun. The Empire responded with fury. Fleet Marshal Vacan's counteroffensive came swift and brutal, a hammer blow designed to crush the uprising before it could spread. Dozens of warships descended upon the contested colony, their plasma batteries reducing entire city blocks to molten ruin. Imperial legions stormed through the streets, their war machines rolling over the shattered remnants of human resistance. The message was clear: submission or annihilation. But the Americans had already disappeared into the ruins. General Robert Callahan watched the carnage unfold from the underground command center, his expression unreadable. The enemy had brought overwhelming firepower, reducing the colony to a smoldering wasteland, but they had failed to understand one thing: America did not fight fair. Satellite uplinks are restored, Captain Andrea Hayes reported. They're targeting infrastructure, but they've left supply lines intact. Arrogance. Callahan nodded. The Empire still thought in terms of occupation and dominance, expecting humanity to break under pressure. They hadn't yet realized that the rules of war had changed. All teams in position, he asked. Affirmative. Hayes confirmed. Phase 2 is ready to begin. The order came without hesitation. Across the war-torn colony, American strike teams emerged from the rubble like specters, their movements precise and coordinated. They did not engage the enemy head-on. They struck at the heart of the war machine. Saboteurs infiltrated fuel depots, planting explosives that sent fireballs roaring into the sky. Electronic warfare teams jammed communications, flooding Imperial command channels with static and misinformation. Entire squads of elite operatives ghosted through the wreckage, eliminating high-value targets with ruthless efficiency. Then came the real horror. In the dead of night, the first reports reached the Imperial command. A forward operating base had gone silent. When a patrol was sent to investigate, they found nothing but bodies. Hundreds of soldiers slain with precise, clinical brutality. Their throats slit, their weapons stacked neatly beside them. Above the command post, a banner fluttered in the toxic wind, its message stark and unforgiving. Not one step back. Fear spread like an infection. Soldiers began to hesitate, flinching at shadows. Imperial officers barked orders, but discipline frayed as the pressure mounted. Vacan knew the signs. He had seen enemy armies crumble before, but never like this. Never with this kind of deliberate, merciless calculation. His forces had superior technology, greater numbers, an empire's worth of resources at their backs. And yet, for the first time in his career, he felt something he had never known in war. He felt hunted. The Americans pressed the advantage. Fleet elements lurking beyond the system struck without warning, launching precision orbital bombardments that ripped through Imperial formations. Kinetic strikes. Rods of tungsten dropped from high orbit, impacted with the force of nuclear detonations, turning entire battalions to dust. Enemy warships found themselves ambushed in deep space, their engines sabotaged, their crews suffocated as their life support mysteriously failed. Vacan's officers clamored for answers, for solutions. How could a lesser race inflict such losses? How could they fight without fear, without hesitation? It wasn't until a captured American soldier was interrogated that the truth became clear. The Imperial interrogator, a veteran of countless conquests, had expected pleas for mercy, broken sobs, desperate bargains for life. Instead, he was met with cold, unyielding defiance. "You think this is bad," the soldier had said, even as blood dripped from his mouth. "You should have studied our history. We don't lose wars. We end them." The soldier never spoke again. He took his own life before the next round of questioning. Vacan read the transcript in silence. For the first time, the weight of his mistakes settled upon him. He had miscalculated. Gravely, the Empire had expected a conventional war, a conflict of ships and armies, of tactics and brute force. What they had encountered was something entirely different. Total war, fought with the singular purpose of annihilation. The Americans did not seek peace, nor negotiation. They sought vengeance, and they would stop at nothing to see it fulfilled. His officers proposed countermeasures. Escalate planetary bombardments. Deploy heavier warships. Bring in reinforcements from the inner systems. Vacan approved every measure, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The humans had already proven their ability to adapt, to exploit weaknesses the Empire didn't even know it had. Even worse, the war was spreading. Reports trickled in from other battlefronts. Human forces launching precision strikes across multiple occupied worlds, their tactics replicating with terrifying efficiency. The flames of war had been lit, and they would not be easily extinguished. As Vacan stared at the burning colony through the viewport of his flagship, he realized a truth he had been too proud to admit. The Empire had made its second mistake. The first was underestimating humanity. The second was giving them a reason to fight. The Empire was breaking. Fleet Marshal Vacan watched the reports flood in, his mind struggling to grasp the scope of the disaster unfolding across Imperial space. Entire regiments had gone dark. Entire fleets vanished without a trace. The war, once a simple act of conquest, had spiraled into something monstrous, something the Empire had never faced before. Fear. It spread through the ranks like a disease, unseen but impossible to ignore. Soldiers whispered in hushed voices about the disappearances, about the brutal efficiency of the humans. It was no longer just about battles lost. It was about the dread that came before the fighting even began. It started in the frontier worlds. The same pattern over and over again. A garrison would lose contact with command. Reinforcements would arrive, expecting a standard insurgency. Instead, they would find only the remains, Imperial soldiers, executed with ruthless precision, their weapons untouched, their supply depots burning. No sign of resistance, no pitched battle, only death. The survivors, if there were any, spoke of an enemy that moved like wraiths. They never attacked head-on, never played by the rules of war. They struck at night, in the cold silence of vacuum, when the mind was weakest. The Empire, used to overwhelming their enemies through sheer force, found itself fighting a ghost. On the planet of Vorse Prime, the breaking point came. It had been a model colony, the Empire's foothold in human-occupied space. It was here that the legions had been strongest, where the banners of Imperial dominion had flown highest. When the humans had first launched their rebellion, the officers stationed there had laughed. They had seen primitive species resist before, only to crumble beneath orbital bombardments and precision strikes. That was before the blackouts began. Power grids flickered and failed. Communication towers were severed, their relays destroyed with surgical accuracy. Patrols sent into the industrial districts failed to return, their last transmissions garbled, filled with gunfire and screams. Panic set in. The garrison commander, Lord Admiral Kaelvex, ordered a lockdown, sealing the city's perimeter. No one was to enter or leave. He deployed every available soldier, every war machine at his disposal. The humans would not take Vorse Prime. That night, the city burned. Explosions rocked the military district as fuel depots erupted into flames, lighting the night sky like a second sun. The planetary defense batteries, the pride of the Imperial occupation, were destroyed before they could even be activated. Barracks were overrun, soldiers slaughtered in their beds, their throats slit without a sound. By the time the Empire realized what was happening, it was already over. At dawn, the surviving officers gathered in the Central Command Tower, trembling as they watched the battlefields. There was no grand army outside the city gates, no fleet descending from the sky. The humans had never even been seen. Yet, one by one, Imperial positions had been erased. Then the message came. A single transmission, broadcasted on every screen, every frequency. Callahan's voice was calm, almost casual. Your empire dies here. The final phase began. From the shadows, American strike teams moved with chilling efficiency. Every remaining Imperial stronghold was hit simultaneously. Officers were dragged from their bunkers, shot without ceremony. Tanks were mobilized, their pilots found with knives in their backs. Even the most heavily fortified buildings offered no protection. The humans slipped past defenses as if they had always been there, waiting. By midday, the last remaining Imperial forces surrendered, not because they were outgunned, not because they were outmaneuvered, because they were afraid. Vorse Prime was not just a defeat. It was a massacre. Fleet Marshal Vacan listened to the reports in silence. His hands, once steady, trembled as he gripped the command table. This was not how wars were fought. The Empire conquered through superior firepower, through discipline, through centuries of experience. But this was different. This was psychological. The humans were not merely winning battles. They were waging war on the mind itself, turning fear into their greatest weapon. The Empire had faced countless rebellions, countless uprisings, but never had they faced an enemy that hunted them. Never had they faced an enemy that enjoyed it. His officers debated, arguing over the next course of action. Reinforcements were needed. More ships, more soldiers, more resources. But Vacan already knew the truth. It wouldn't matter. The Empire had already made its final mistake. They had not just underestimated humanity. They had provoked them. The war was over. Fleet Marshal Vacan stood alone in the dimly lit chamber, staring at the holographic display of Imperial space. The once proud banners of conquest, the sprawling dominion that had taken centuries to build, were now nothing more than shattered remnants. Red markers, symbols of lost fleets, fallen strongholds, and dead colonies, outnumbered the blue. His forces had been bled dry, not in grand battles of honor, but in a slow, methodical dissection of everything they had once believed unshakable. The final order had come from the Imperial Corps. The High Council, those bloated bureaucrats who had once mocked the human resistance, now whispered in trembling voices. The emperor himself, unseen for decades, had broken his silence with a single decree: surrender. Completely. Immediately. Vacan felt the weight of it settle in his chest. The word was foreign to him, to his people. The empire did not surrender. They crushed. They conquered. They absorbed. But this was not a war they could win. Reports had confirmed the worst. The Imperial legions, the greatest military force in the known galaxy, were no longer an army. They were prey. Entire fleets had deserted, vanishing into deep space rather than face another battle. Worlds that had once sworn loyalty to the Emperor now declared neutrality, some even welcoming the humans as liberators. It was more than just warfare. It was an unraveling of everything the Empire had built. And the humans, monsters in the shape of men, had done it all without breaking stride. A transmission awaited him, already decoded and blinking patiently on his display. He knew who it was before he even played it. General Robert Callahan, the face that had haunted Imperial war councils for months, now stared at him through the cold blue light of the projector. His expression was unreadable, that same ruthless efficiency radiating from every fiber of his being. He spoke with the tone of a man who had already won. Your emperor has surrendered. Your people will follow. You, Vacan, will make it official. The words were calm, almost polite, but there was no mistaking the iron beneath them. Vacan clenched his fists. If I refuse? Callahan didn't even blink. Then your homeworld burns. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And the worst part, the part that made Vacan's stomach twist, was that he believed him. The Empire had seen what the humans were capable of. They did not wage war to subjugate. They did not seek terms, negotiations, or tributes. They did not conquer as the Empire had. They erased, one by one, world by world. They had dismantled everything, reducing entire civilizations to nothing but whispers of fear. Vacan exhaled slowly. He had fought his entire life, climbed the ranks through decades of blood and war. He had crushed rebellions, shattered fleets, enforced the will of the Emperor with unwavering resolve. But now, as he stood before the inevitable, he realized something profound. The Empire had never known war. Not real war. Not like the humans. He closed his eyes. His choice had already been made. When he opened them again, he reached for the console, his voice hollow as he spoke the words that would mark the end of an era. We surrender. The message was sent. Across the vast expanse of space, Imperial warships powered down their weapons, their once mighty fleets reduced to silent, drifting relics of a fallen empire. Legions laid down their arms, officers discarding the banners they had once sworn to defend. Across every remaining stronghold, the same order echoed, stand down. And in the heart of the Imperial capital, the great halls of power fell into silence as the last edict of the Emperor was broadcasted for all to hear. The reign of the Galactic Empire was over, but for humanity, it was only the beginning. As the dust of war settled, a new reality took shape. The humans did not demand tribute. They did not enslave or subjugate. They did not replace the Emperor with another tyrant. They simply stepped into the void the Empire had left behind. Worlds once ruled through fear now swore loyalty willingly. Entire systems, once conquered by force, aligned themselves with humanity, not because they had to, but because they chose to. It was not a new empire that arose from the ashes. It was something far more terrifying, an idea, a force that could not be broken, not by war, not by fire, not by fear. Humanity had not just won. They had ascended,